welcome to ConTinual, the never-ending convention. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and today I'll be talking with horror grandmaster, living legend of horror and fantasy, and member of the Knightly Order of Brazov Citadel, Chelsea Quinn Yarbro. Welcome, Quinn.
Thank you very much.
We're so glad you could join us here today for our one-on-one interview. And to start off, let's start off at the beginning of your journey as a writer. What made you decide? What made you want to be a storyteller? You know, was it a book? Was it a movie? Was it something that somebody told you? Or was it you just got mad at something you saw or heard and wanted to fix it? What started you off?
When I was a kid, and I mean a very little kid, my mother used to read to me. And when she read, she would run her finger under what she was reading. So by the time I was 4, I could read.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know that was what was happening. But I thought it was wonderful when I figured out that all the letters were pronounced the same way most of the time. I thought this is going to be a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. And so the thing that actually hooked me was Horton Hatches the Egg.
Oh, Dr. Seuss.
Yes, Dr. Seuss. And I tried to figure out a little bit about what you write stories about. And because I could read, not at a very advanced level, but I would look at books that my parents had been interested in to see if I could figure out what it was about them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would read as much as I could, which was not necessarily very much, but enough to make it an interesting project. And I began to be, I guess what you think of it is sort of like a literary critic, because I knew, Dr. Seuss and Rudyard Kipling,
Mm-hmm.
That's
quite a combination.
Good. I figured that out. And but some of the other things that were written for children, sort of made my hackles rise. So I didn't want to write like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was 6, I wrote my first story, and it was about 18 pages long in childish printed letters. And my business manager has persuaded me a couple of years ago to revisit that story and write it the way that I would write it now. And I did.
Oh, what kind of story was it?
It was about a mermaid who wanted to fly.
Oh, okay.
And how she would go about it.
Mm-hmm.
And probably a Jungian therapist would think there is much in that reflects my own determination that I had to do something. And I decided that, having no real experience to draw on whatsoever, I decided that by the time I reached the end of my life, I would have published 100 books.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've passed that now, and the whole business of being a writer was not anything like I thought it was when I was 6. But it was sort of like it's in the genes.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do it, you'll go quietly crazy. So you might as well get it out of your system and get paid for it.
Yes, and stop the people talking in your head, from committing violence. And yeah. They telling their stories helps a lot. Getting back to that mermaid story, though, did you write it as a story for children or as a story for adults?
Well, when I rewrote it, you mean? Yeah. I wrote it as close to the way as that I wrote it when I was actually working on it, but with filling in some of the things that needed to be filled in or explained, or doing something to tighten the structure.
Mm-hmm. So it will be a book for children, I take it?
Or no, it'll be because it's only about it is, shall we be charitable? It's about 7,000 words.
Mm-hmm. So short story, or
and I keep thinking there must be a place for it to go, but in the meantime, it can sit in my limbo file, and I'll find a market for it eventually.
Yeah. Well, you've, over 100 books. And how many short stories slash novellas slash short fiction pad out that 100? Because I know
About, about 150.
Wow, absolutely, wow. I'm in awe. I'm sorry. And being in awe, I'm going to immediately change the subject and get on to the theme, the subject that you are most famous for. Let's talk about vampires. It ain't mermaids, it's vampires.
I like folklore.
Mm-hmm. So when your mom read to you, I presume then there were a lot of fairy tales in there as well as
Well, the
Kipling
fairy
and.
tales and the folklore came from my Finnish grandfather.
Oh, okay.
And he told me not only a lot of the stories of the Kalevala,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of other just Finnish folk tales. And he was not one for speaking very much, but for some reason I brought it out of him, and he would take me on long walks. And I don't remember very much of Finn, but I can still make my way through it on a very simple level as a language. And it's a trial for everything, but it stays with me, and it's in a weird way it's reassuring, because it's a kind of contact with a figure who was very important when I was very young. He died when I was 7.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And well, he was a logger, and he, at the ripe old age of 76, he cut down a redwood tree and was trimming the branches off it to fix the sauna. And by the way, that's the right way to say it.
Okay.
And he had a stroke, and since he was living out in the middle of nowhere, it took his housemate about 4 hours to get into town to get people back. And by the time they got him all the way into town, he was really, and they couldn't do all the hookups then that they do now.
Right.
So he was sort of in and out, and by the next morning he was gone.
Yeah, but whoa, that's a story in itself. But yeah, I wish you had had him a little bit longer, just because I know he was important to you.
Yes, well, I have a rash of Finnish uncles who are they're all gone now, but
they kept
that family tends to live long, which I take at the ripe old age of 78 to be a good indication that I don't have to start worrying about tying everything up in neat bundles yet.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, that a long-lived family history is always wonderful, and I'm glad you had the uncles there to at least round out the memories of Finnish folklore for you and the epics. So, but wow, 77 cutting redwoods.
And he was not a big man. He was about 4 inches taller than I am, and I'm 4'11". And very wiry, and just very determined.
Well, yeah. And I'm hearing themes that go back to the vampires here. The long lives, the short and wiry. Because
well, actually, the historical man was short, but he was stocky, short and stocky, 5'6". And he was a real person. And he claimed to be between 2,000 and 4,000 years old. And he said that he kept his immortality by drinking the elixir of life. Where do you go from there?
Vampire!
Hi. There. I was originally planning to make him a minor character, as a subsidiary real character in the book. And the more I studied him, I thought, why am I bothering? Here he is, dressed in black and white, making his own jewels. It would be foolish to say that he would not upstage anything I would come up with at that point.
Yes, well, the character of Saint-Germain was cut a large swath across the 18th century.
Yes.
He was a celebrity before there was a celebrity culture. So, what was the genesis? I mean, we know the historical Saint-Germain was there, But what caused you to create this particular vampire? Because I read something that said that you read Dracula quite a bit, but you didn't really want to write that kind of vampire.
Well, I wanted to do, one of the things I realized about the third time through Dracula when I was a teenager, that there was an awful lot that was going on there, not because of what the vampire is, but because of what the reaction of Victorian creatures around him were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, what is this awful thing he does? Well, he provides provisional immortality through an intensely pleasurable erotic experience. What's wrong with that?
Mm-hmm.
So jumping off from that, I started to think about, okay, how do you make a vampire that is a recognizable vampire, living by vampire rules, and then go ahead and say, okay, now he is not the bad guy, he's the good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about the time that I ran into Saint-Germain, the historical one, and said, and so one of the things I was thinking about, when you're going to live for a very, very long time, you are going to lose all your relatives. You're going to lose your language. You're going to lose your country. You're going to be the ultimate exile.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean that you're going to turn into a rapacious monster, in which case they will kill you very shortly? Or you can develop compassion for the human condition, mm-hmm, and find a way to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
And that sustained me now for about 40 years.
Yes, well, finding compassion and staying alive are both good things. Because if you've got compassion and a long life, you can be more productive and, mm-hmm, do good in the world, regardless of whether or not the Victorians thought you were evil. And I think that the evil, it's not just the sex, though, and you're touching upon it when you say the ultimate exile. It was also the fear of the other, the fear of yes, in the case of Dracula, somebody coming from Eastern Europe who, looked different, dressed different, smelled different even.
And was Asian.
Mm-hmm.
That's a no-no.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still think Dracula is a wonderful novel, and certainly, mm-hmm, a brilliant creation on Stoker's part. Mm-hmm. But I'm also very much aware that if you're going to do a folkloric character like a vampire, mm-hmm, you better play by the rules and play by them very strictly, or the readers won't believe it for a minute. Mm-hmm. And in that case, what I did was I got a couple of books on vampire folklore and made a list of all the things that are believed about vampires, mm-hmm, throughout the world, because all cultures have a vampire legend of one kind or another. Like they have a were creature legend too. Mm-hmm. And so I figured that whatever was believed about them for 80% of the time, that was going to be true. Mm-hmm. The other 20%, if I liked it, I kept it. If not, I threw it out.
Yes, as we do as writers. Yes. Yeah. You've said in other interviews that one of your purposes, in addition to, creating a logical vampire that would last, because you're right, you get too rapacious and the humans who outnumber you and have the advantage of daylight are going to end your life. But, in interviews, you've mentioned that part of your goal in the Saint-Germain series is to explore the lives of women throughout history.
Yeah.
What made you choose a male protagonist as the lens for this exploration?
Because men have always had fewer limitations put upon them by society, and they have the advantage of privilege. And so if you want someone who can get into other people's lives effectively without necessarily being exposed to all kinds of unpleasant consequences, then you damn well better be male.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But this hasn't stopped you from writing about some of the other vampires in his orbit, most notably
Yep.
Olivia and Madeline.
Yeah.
And, you know, I thought it rather interesting that you saw the Roman women, because, you know, you look at Roman law and it's very misogynistic, so few rights. But you saw Roman law as preferable to the barbarian codes, which, for example, in many cases allowed women to inherit, which Salic law and
Well, the
Roman law did not.
did allow women to inherit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they had an interesting law that I found fascinating when I ran across it. I went, oh boy, that's a good one. That unless you were a slave because you were a captured foreign enemy or a criminal being punished, you had the right to start what was essentially a bank account and to build that bank account and buy your own freedom. And your owner could not stop you from doing so, and it could not be taxed.
Mm-hmm.
And that for that period in history is astonishingly in its enlightenment. And
Yeah.
I like the fact that those 18 Vestal virgins could overrule the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
So they were misogynistic, but compared to, say, the Greeks,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they are, you know, and they're actually very modern in many ways. I mean, they're a lot like us. They're gadget happy. Oh boy, somebody invented a steam toy. Let's go do this. Everybody wants a steam toy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they also came up with the idea of, you know, the functional arch and why you have to break step with your troops when you're crossing a bridge or it's going to fall down.
Yes. Yes.
And all that other good stuff. And they also had surgeons who invented things like traction.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they are easy to identify with and to understand more of their social dynamics than a great many other very ancient cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, besides, I like their artwork, I like their buildings, and Italy is a beautiful place to do things in.
So, have you traveled to Italy to do some research?
Not to do research. I've been in Italy twice now, and the first time was just after the Worldcon that was in The Hague.
Mm-hmm.
And I was with friends, and we drove from Amsterdam to Florence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow!
And
well, that's a road trip.
Yeah, it was a fascinating trip, and but we spent a lot of time walking around the old city.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in a nice little albergo that was just about 4 blocks away from the cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did almost everything on foot and had a grand old time. And because I'd already written The Palace and Ariosto,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'd researched the city very well. And one of the games we were playing is that we would leave the map at home.
Ah, and get lost.
And can I find my way? Well, I used to be a cartographer.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So,
yeah.
you know, walking around a city that I'd drawn a map of was not that hard.
You just have to remember what you put. And it's funny how much the street plan of ancient and Renaissance Rome reflects the current plan of Rome. I mean, we do not, as a rule, change our road maps. I did a story once where it was set in Nanjing, and a lot of the Ming era street grid applied to present day street grids.
Yeah, well, digging up streets and rerouting them can sometimes be difficult, especially like in places like Rome, where you have all those great big buildings. You know, you want to take down the Colosseum to put a freeway through it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are people who would try. Yeah, it would be a very bad idea, especially since that particular plot of land is subject to earthquakes. Yes. But yeah, that doesn't stop people from like trying to tear down New York and rebuild it in Cuomo's image.
Well, that's the weird thing about it's one of the things that about America that I find very, very interesting is that very, very few of us have been here for more than a few generations.
Mhm.
Yes, there are some, but they are not the majority by a long
Right.
slice. So, and one of the things that because of that, there's always a desire to put, as it were, the new mark on everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, if you've got old buildings, you know, you've got to make sure that if you've got something you're sure is going to be better, you're going to put that up instead. Now, out here, of course, we have the problem that we have earthquakes.
Yeah.
Like Rome.
Mm-hmm.
But
yes.
Somewhat messier. And I actually was in both the Loma Prieta and then the Northridge quake in LA.
Oh.
And, you know, they were about 4 years apart, and it was sort of like, oh, come on, we've got to stop this. This is not working at all. Come on, just calm down, everybody. And that includes the earth.
Yes.
But it was the first time the Loma Prieta was the first time that the regional governments, the Bay Area Association of Governments, actually were able to get the cities up and running by the following week. They had ferries that they borrowed from Seattle, brought down so that they could actually have a morning commute into the city.
Uh-huh.
And and you know, everybody was thinking, you know, well, here's, you know, there's all this rubble, parts of the Bay Bridge are down, and you know, freeways collapsed, but you know, that doesn't slow anything down particularly.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's amazing, you know. I would think we'd be paralyzed, but we had in Washington, D.C. in 1981, 82, we had an airplane fly into one of our main bridges for
yeah.
And we were like locked down despite having a subway system and just for that bridge. So, but to get back to Saint-Germain bit, because I really do.
After all, has been in San Francisco in one of the books.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you've set more than one book in San Francisco. We'll get to that as well. But we've touched on the research, and I know you're a research fiend. About how much research is involved in a typical book in the Saint-Germain universe?
Well, it's actually this universe. I mean, the only thing that's different about it is he and his little group are in it too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very careful about historical detail, and I have a couple of books that are like summaries of historical events by year.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that an awful lot to find out not only what is going on in the period I'm setting it in, but what was going on immediately before.
Yeah.
So that you actually know. And then, of course, if maps are available, I want them.
Yes.
And I would like to have, I've got lots of references for things like furniture and clothing. And I have a couple of wonderful books about food.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another book about climate, world climate, starting about 3,000 years ago and coming up to the modern day.
Mm-hmm.
And so exactly what was the weather like, when were the volcanoes going off, when were they not?
And that affects the weather for several years afterwards.
Yeah.
Many ice ages have been caused by volcanoes and the like.
And, so at the moment, I'm trying to find out when was the last time in the 1600s that Montserrat erupted.
Mm-hmm.
The one in the Caribbean.
Yeah, because that's the jet stream would bring the ash to Western Europe.
Yes, but it would also, screw up things like shipping.
Yep.
And when you're doing it under sail,
mm-hmm.
you really have a problem if you had a volcano being frisky.
Yeah, I would imagine.
If that has happened, if that was going on, I have to make sure that I work around it. I also need to have an island near Montserrat that doesn't actually exist. So I'm going to have to create an island.
Oh, sneaky there, sneaky there. So, you do so much research for this, and you research things like 13th century Bohemia was one Saint-Germain novel, and then another was set amid the Cathars, I believe. And where did you find research material for the Cathars in the 9th century?
We don't have anything from them. We know they wrote. We don't have anything from them in their writing, so we don't know what they thought of themselves, which is a disadvantage when you're trying to write about them. But the Byzantines, the Bulgarians, and the Persians wrote a lot about them, and of course they did each from their own point of view. So my trick, if it's a trick, was to look at what they all said and triangulate and say, okay, this is what it is in the middle, and assume that that's close enough for folk music. And I did find out that from the Persians, bless their buttons, they said that the Khazars wrote their records on silk with blue paint.
Ooh.
And they're fascinating. I mean, just the fact that they were self-converted Jews, but included the worship of horses because that's what they've done before. The time that one took me a little longer than usual to write because I had to keep checking back. Do I really know this or what don't I know? And it's yes, that's Orphans of Memory, and yes, it's real. Yes, I wrote it. Yes, it is sitting, in the stack at Balaron.
Your new publisher.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. How, with all this research, with all the world building and the complexity of the characters, because, I know that when you have a character who has so much life as Saint-Germain and Olivia do, and some of the other characters who've been, have extended lifespans, their point of view entails so much complexity. They're bringing so much to every situation. How do you pull all that together in a single draft? Because you've said you're a one draft writer.
Pretty much. And I don't know. I mean, that's what happens. It's never as clear to me as it is in the first draft. And every now and then I'll get into something where I'm, something is not working and I don't know what it is. I just sit there and say, somebody tell me what I got wrong. And eventually somebody will. And then we'll get back on schedule.
Somebody in here, right?
Yeah. Yes. Somebody on the page. They will say, okay. Well, in Tempting Fate, there is one chapter that I'd come at it from 3 different angles, and it just was going yeah. And so, I said my usual. Somebody tell me what it is I'm missing. And Roger, bless his buttons, said it. I had it back to front. The beginning reaction of the story, the action begins at the end. And so I thought, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And of course, as usual, never fight with the character. The character is always right. And I got, it just went like, a warm knife through soft butter. It was just because I knew what had to happen, but Roger was right. It was in the wrong order.
Yeah. Well, the characters generally are right, and as you said earlier, Shakespeare taught you that. You can't have a better teacher than that.
Nope.
Absolutely can't.
He's there. I'm not a religious person, but I have one saint in my calendar, and that's Saint Willie, who is the patron saint of the English language.
And his feast day is coming up on April 23rd, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I used to have dinner parties on the 23rd of April for Saint Willie's Day.
Oh, cool.
But unfortunately, since I now have to use at least one stick in the house.
Mhm.
Cooking is nowhere near as easy as it used to be.
Yeah, you sort of need to be standing up and doing things. And if you're not standing up and doing things, you're moving from counter to table to counter to table, and it's a pain. So but let's talk about things that are a bit more pleasant. Some of us, find cooking a pain under any circumstances, but yeah, let's talk about more books. You have written in so many genres that I could find: mystery, science fiction, romance, military history, alternate history. Let's talk about something that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with, but you have so many books, is in mystery. I mean, when I was doing my research, I came up with the Madame Vernae books, the Mycroft Tome books, and an Ian Fleming mystery written with Bill Fawcett under the pen name of Quinn Fawcett. And then
when the publisher insisted they wouldn't do it as a collaboration, they wanted one name, and so they came up with that. And I thought, I don't know who you think you're kidding.
Because don't they put pictures of both of you in the back of the book or something like that?
No, we haven't. Bill used Catherine Kurtz's husband to be, the image of Quinn Fawcett, but it was, working with Bill. I don't like to collaborate in general, because it usually turns out it's not a collaboration, it's a collaboration, and one of the other of you pounds the other into the ground. But I do like Bill because he's very structural in a way that I'm not. And he would come out to Berkeley, and we would sit around for a day and a half. We would work out essentially the storyline. Then he'd go back to Chicago. I would write the first draft with little insertions saying, I need 600 words here about the preparedness of the British Navy before the Battle of the Nile. And, all the way through, and he would fill those in, and then he'd send it back, and I'd smooch it all so that it looked a little more like Doyle. It would have been harder to do if it were my own ideas, because I would be losing things by the time I got around to smooching. But if I'm pretending to be Doyle, then, it's like playing a character, For the moment I'm Doyle, but I don't have his hangups.
Yeah, he had his share, and fairies.
Yep. And the two plays that I wrote for the Holmesian group up in Jackson, I've novelized them both, and they are available online if anyone's interested.
Okay. Jackson, Wyoming?
Jackson, California.
Oh, Jackson, California.
Which is the county seat for Amador County, which means it is in the foothills of the Sierra, and it is due east of Sacramento.
Oh, okay. I confess I don't know California geography very well. And how did Holmesian plays wind up being produced in?
There is a Holmesian, an official Holmesian group in Jackson. And one of the things they did to increase their visibility is they started putting on plays. And there's a couple who are very good friends of mine that I periodically visit, and they belong to this group. And so they were saying they didn't have anything new. And Cedric, mentioned that, well, we got a writer here, and she's done things about Holmes, so meaning more Mycroft than Sherlock. And so I told them, I'd write them one. And I did. And they performed it, and they had a good run. And so they asked, could I do another? And yes, I could. And one of the things I've always found annoying about Doyle is the prudishness of his main character. And considering the how flagrant and everywhere visible the sex industries were in Victorian London. You know, and in theory, Sherlock knows everything about all the criminals, and doesn't seem to know anything about any of them. I've got a character who is in both plays, other than the Holmes brothers, and that character is Madame Yeoh. She's half English and half Chinese, and she's a brothel keeper. And so she knows a lot of stuff, and she's a good source for information, especially to the Holmes brothers, and especially to Mycroft, because some of her clientele are foreign. And so the second one is about Madame Yao being in a situation where she is she's being, well, in modern terminology, stalked. And
it's not a new phenomenon by any means.
Oh no, it you know, half those wonderful medieval love things about the knight who is, you know, faithful, you know, unto death to his true lady, so he's forever after her. We never know what her opinion of this was.
Yep. No, we don't. We don't. We only, that's one thing that always bothered me, that so much of what we get is the guy's point of view.
Yeah.
And I mean, you going even back to things like the Greek myths.
Yeah.
You know, we hear about Persephone and Hades, not from Persephone's viewpoint as the queen of hell, but from her upset, angry mother, who is worshipped by somebody who has a grudge, Orpheus, a grudge against both Hades and Persephone. You know, what would Persephone's take on it be?
One of the things that I never liked about the Greek myths is that so many of the demons are female, disproportionately to the number of, you know, really bad guys. You know, I'm going, you know what, fellas, you're not always the heroes.
And yeah, and then you have characters like Medusa who are punished for being victims.
Yeah. Well, that's nothing new. We're all familiar with that little syndrome.
Yes, we are. We are. And I'm sure Olivia would have plenty to say on it.
Oh, you know, it's like when I've had readers periodically complain to me that Olivia, why is she always so annoyed? And, you know, the answer is, well, when she was a Roman matron, she had legal rights. And through most of her life, her very long life, they have been taken away from her steadily, and she's very annoyed.
Yeah, I sympathize entirely. I sympathize entirely. But, you know, talking about characters who have minimal rights, Madame Vernae, yet manages agency notwithstanding. She would seem a bit of an, you know, Mycroft Holmes is somebody that, if you're going to expand the Holmesian universe, is a logical character, one whom you expect to have agency, one whom is alluded to in a score of mysteries, including the very strong whiff of a suggestion in Rex Stoutz's Nero Wolf stories that Nero is Mycroft's scion. But Madame Vernae seems a bit of an unusual choice. How did that come about?
Well, that was Bill. Bill, you know, called me up and he said, I can't write well about women. I'm not going to argue with that. He's right. He can't. But you know, he wanted to do something about, you know, the French Vernae. And so we started talking about that, and you know, we had an editor who was Bill had been talking to, who was interested. So we said, you know, okay, well, you know, we'll give it a try, and we ended up getting, I think, some tolerably good period mysteries out of it. I didn't research them quite as vigorously as I would if it had just been me, but then I probably wouldn't have written her in the first place, because I would have to have paid the Doyle estate, and and in doing it, I left a lot of the the diplomatic and political stuff to Bill, and you know, told him where to insert, and he did, and it all hung together reasonably well. And as I say, we had an editor who was enjoying doing them, so it made life a little more pleasant than sometimes when dealing with editors who don't necessarily understand history.
That can be. You don't want to get into an argument with your editor because you're wrong, even if you're right. You suffer even if you're right. You know.
Well, you know, it's the second editor I had on the Palace. Was talking to me about she wanted me to, she said, you know, this character Lorenzo is so wonderful, can't he live a little longer? And I said, well, I wish he could, but the fact of the matter is he died Sunday, April 8th, 1492, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. And it had not occurred to her that that was real. And the fact that Savonarola refused, you know, referred to prostitutes as diseased pieces of meat with eyes. He did.
I know he did. That's why I consider him one of the great villains of history. We won't even get into the bonfire of the vanities.
He was, you know, making Botticelli burn his own painting strikes me as something. Again, I'm not religious at all, but that I wish there were a place called hell and you could send him to it.
Oh yeah, no, it's he and the Spanish Inquisition just sort of the Inquisition had much more scope and was, you know, a Holocaust.
And lasted a lot longer.
Yeah, but he was working on it. He was working on it.
Oh yeah, I think he had ambitions to, you know, get rid of all the things that are fun.
Yeah, they always do for some reason. Well, but fortunately, history stopped him relatively quickly, and I'm very glad for that.
Oh, yes. Couldn't have happened to a nicer fellow.
Absolutely. But you know, you've been making some unusual choices throughout your career, and especially in mystery. And when doing the research, I was delighted to read about the Chesterton Holt series of mysteries set in 1920s, because 1920s, what's not to love in that? I mean, really, I read somewhere that the 1920s were the only decade in history that weren't immediately thought of as old-fashioned when they were passed. Nobody ever thought the 20s were old-fashioned.
They thought it was screwy and crazy and possibly illegal.
And fun.
And since I'm dealing with the main character, whether Chesterton Holt is the main character, but he's also a ghost, which makes it difficult for him to interact with a lot of stuff. He is dealing with a young female reporter in Philadelphia.
Yep.
And Poppy is one of those women that were the first real feminists, in the sense that they approached it economically rather than domestically. And she's from a wealthy family, which gives her a certain immunity. And she wants to take on considerably more than her editor wants her to take on.
Yes, he wants to fix the world because he has the privilege that makes him think he can, but reality does intrude. And oh boy, when you talk about privilege in Philadelphia at that point in time, that's when my mother was growing up, and the stories. But it's not just Philadelphia, but you know, taking your own hometown of San Francisco.
No, my hometown is
Berkeley. Well, Bay Area.
Yes. They, you know, the place that everybody thinks they know what it's like because it's the biggest college town around for, you know, miles and miles and miles. And it's a good college town, but it is a college town. And the other thing, that means that it's also a company town. You know, just as when I was a kid, Fort Bragg, California was, you know, essentially the Union Lumber Company. And Berkeley, California is essentially the University of California. Yep.
Indeed. And but you do know San Francisco.
Oh yeah, I went to college in San Francisco, and I have friends and relations in San Francisco.
So, you know, one of your characters, one of the first mysteries that I encountered when I was doing the research was the mysteries featuring Charlie Moon, who is both a Bay Area lawyer and a tribal American, a member of an Ojibwe. Am I saying that right? Ojibwe shaman.
Yeah.
That, you wrote those books about 40 years ago now, during a time when diverse protagonists were just not the norm. What was the genesis of Charlie, and why did you decide to tell his stories?
Well, I had an Arapaho friend in college, and he was studying law.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious as to why, because it struck me that this was not an obvious choice.
Right.
And he said, well, they're not going to let us fix it our way, so we have to fix it your way.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started reading around about various of the First Nations,
Mm-hmm.
and how it was developing, and found out that there were a number of various tribal people who were getting their own interior lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And what was particularly interesting about my Arapaho friend was his he had two worldviews that he held almost constantly. One was native, and the other was essentially adapted European.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very determined to find a way to operate that area in between.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought about that for a while. And after a while, Charlie said, hello.
One of the characters showing up again and telling you where his story is to
I'm
go.
sure you can write about me now.
Well, there have been a lot of characters over the years who've done that to you. I mean, obviously 100 novels, 150 short stories. We will not but there's nonfiction, there's science fiction, there's romance, there's military history, there's alternate history. And
Westerns.
And Westerns, yes. Westerns, how could I forget the Westerns? But I mean, most writers write in one or two channels. As I said, how did you wind up creating a delta? Where all of this.
I don't know. That's just the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
If I could figure out how it works, I would package it and sell it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have no idea. I mean, I've had whole hosts, and I still do have whole hosts of characters for books that I haven't been able to write yet. They're sitting sort of like somewhere back in here.
Mm-hmm.
And periodically they will, have a picnic and remind me that they're there, and would I please write about them now?
And and meanwhile, Saint-Germain doesn't shut up, and neither does Olivia.
Right. And speaking of that group, I would love to do a book about James Emerson Tree.
Okay.
Madeleine's lover from Tempting Fate.
Ah, okay.
Reporter,
mm-hmm.
who becomes a vampire when he's about 50. But even when he wakes up and staggers off to Montalia to see Madeleine, who isn't there, but the Count is, he doesn't believe in vampires.
That's a problem.
And so part of his being at Montalia with Saint-Germain has to sort of, do kindergarten.
Mm-hmm. Vampire kindergarten, what a concept. and didn't I read that somewhere that Saint-Germain himself had a bit of a genesis and a bunch of kids running around in capes with fake fangs?
Yeah, well, not he, but my deciding to sort of look at the archetype in a different way. They were talking about all this, and I had seen some kids playing, and they were playing vampire games, and so the boys had short blankets tied around their necks for capes,
Mhm.
and they were running around, after the girls who would hold up crosses, and the boys would run away. And I thought, the thing that's interesting is everybody wanted to be the vampire.
Right.
Now, what is so repellent that grown-ups seem to find in this thing that doesn't exist in kids?
Mhm. Well, I think that you've helped change the idea that it is repellent, to
Yep.
and brought us into a new age of vampires, if you will, that are all Saint-Germain's spiritual descendants. What are you working on now? Another Saint-Germain book?
Well, I'm researching the one that takes place in 1630, which is at this point called Treacherous Passage.
Mhm.
And
Pirates.
yeah, pirates and the beginnings of regular trade between the Caribbean and Europe.
Mhm.
And so we have shipping, and we also have the thing that if you're going to ship, you have to hire mercenaries
Mhm.
and their ships to protect your ships from
Right.
the pirates.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you get to the Caribbean, and there are still native people living there. And the other thing is, it's the beginning of the slave trade,
Mhm.
of which Saint-Germain, as we all know, does not approve.
No. For many, many reasons.
Yes,
Yes.
having been one and not liking it at all. Yes.
You've got so many books.
Yeah.
Where can folks find them? And I understand you've got a new publisher. Are they going to bring out all 100 plus?
Well, I don't know whether that's going to be feasible, but I do think that they do want to bring out the entire Saint-Germain group, and they want to bring them out not in publication order, but in historical order.
Ooh, okay.
Starting with Forgotten Gods and going all the way through to Sustenance.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I write one that takes place after that. So.
Hey, with Saint-Germain, you never know.
Yeah, I never know. But for the moment, you're going to have to work with used book dealers or find it on Amazon or something like that, because in order to do and reprint all this stuff, all the rights have to get back to me first.
Mm-hmm.
And that took 2.5 years of legal hijinks.
Mm-hmm.
And but that only takes care of Saint-Germain. We haven't dealt with everything else.
Yeah, I was looking at some of those. I read a lot of mysteries in addition to science fiction and fantasy and romance. And it was very frustrating because even among the used book dealers,
Yeah,
it's seldom that one of your mysteries will appear. Occasionally you can find them in libraries. Thank God for libraries. But it's a trial, and the publisher is called Valeron. Did I get that right?
Yeah, Valeron. They haven't put up their fiction website yet.
Okay.
Because we want to have everything in a row before start saying, hello. And I'm glad that they are being careful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that they are being they're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, just to make sure that we don't get visited by a publisher 10 years down the line to say, oh, by the way, you didn't get the rights back here before we want all the earnings from this particular title.
Yeah.
That would not be fun.
No.
And for what it's worth, for those of you who think you're going to write Saint-Germain stories, no, you're not. That's infringing my copyright, and I have no sense of humor whatsoever about copyright infringement.
I don't think any working writer does. It's too precious. But speaking of being a working writer, and what you knew you wanted to be a writer at 6, okay,
Yeah.
at 7. Looking back on all this time, what advice would you give your young self?
Don't have dreams, have intentions. Mm-hmm. Dreams are ephemeral, and they change and they float away. But intentions are very hard to argue with.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to do this job, have intentions and stick by them, because this is not a job in which you're going to get an awful lot of applause and recognition. Your work will, and you'll stand in the shadow of your work all your life.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, but it's not necessarily a good thing either. I mean, I have had one letter in my career that I would just as soon never have had. It was very polite. It was from a young man in Provo, Utah, who was explaining to me about his religious crisis and what he had realized. And what he had realized was that in order to demonstrate to God his full devotion, he was going to have to kill me.
Oh, God.
And I called a friend of mine who was a deputy sheriff and said, "What do I do?"
Yeah.
He said, "Well, you can't assume it's a joke."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "What you do is you give the letter to the postal inspectors, and they will contact the person who wrote it and explain to him that making death threats is not covered by the First Amendment."
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, and I never heard from him again. But on the advice of the same deputy sheriff, for a couple of years, whenever I went to conventions, I had security.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah, unfortunately, here I am thinking the beauty of this is that, your work stands apart and it has identity, and that identity is immortal. Mm-hmm. But that's where I was looking at it. But oh well, it all depends on where you're standing, doesn't it?
Oh yes, it does. And also you have to remember that you're not responsible for the people who read your stuff.
No.
And what they get out of it is what they get out of it. It may not be what you had in mind at all, but if that's what they get out of it, that's what's in it for them. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard one to swallow, because we would all like to think that, we're writing this wonderfully clear stuff that everybody will comprehend perfectly, and they won't.
They will not. No, I mean, there used to be, for people who are in public affairs, which is a public relations element of the government.
Right.
There were exercises in your training where you were to be turned away from the blackboard and try to describe a complex figure to somebody who is working at the blackboard.
Right.
And it never, ever, ever worked as planned. I don't care who you were. They say that the reason that Ulysses S. Grant was such a successful soldier, because he was one of the few people who could give clear orders in the entire Civil War Union Army. That was his superpower. And even his orders got screwed up because it's two sides. Yeah, it's two sides.
And
okay.
Again, as I say, you cannot, there is nothing you can do to make it so clear that everyone will get it the way you intend it. Mm-hmm. It just isn't going to happen. And if you don't believe that, read something you wrote 20 years ago and see how your view of it would change. Mm-hmm.
So I take it your writing has changed. You weren't perfect.
It's not so much that it's changed, but the angle at which I come at it seems to have changed. Mm-hmm. I'm still telling usually the same sort of stories that have to do with, odd people doing odd things. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, for one thing, I don't need to think as many things out about my basic stuff. Mm-hmm. I know how to do that. And, but when I get into dealing with, societies and the developments of societies and all that, mm-hmm. If you can hear it, that sound, by the way, is trumpet.
Yeah, well, I've had the cat whinging to the point where my husband is being forced to feed it multiple times. So
Anyway.
I think our various felines are telling us that we've come up to against the end of the hour, unfortunately, because I could talk to you for a long, long time.
Well, thank you for asking me in the first place.
Well, my pleasure, really, honestly. But I do what I ask before we go. Is there
Yeah.
anything you'd like to add? Anything I didn't cover that you want to talk about?
Well, I don't want to end on a down note, but for those people who wonder why I walk around with crutches, it's because I had polio when I was 7.
Oh,
I got over it, but as polio, you don't really get over it. It comes back and haunts you. So it's post-polio stuff.
Okay. But obviously you do get around, and you have you have created an amazing body of work and legacy.
Well, thank you. I love all my characters, even the bad guys, sometimes especially the bad guys. Because, as you know, the hero is only as good as the villain is bad.
We need good villains or bad villains.
We do. Yes, and we have to love them for being so loathsome.
Because they give us good stories.
Yes, exactly. That's the job.
And that's the most important thing. Well, thank you so much, Quinn.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you all out there for joining us here at ConTinual.